Good morning, everyone. We are starting our webinar, and Hal and I are here. We will do some introductions, give a few minutes for you to get logged in. We have about 20 some people coming in today, we hope. And we'll do a little bit of overview on some of our process here. If you've not been with one of our webinars before, I think most people are used to this by now, but there's a menu bar at the bottom of your screen. You can use the Q&A, but we encourage you to use the chat instead, because that way everything goes into the chat line up there. You can open the chat and view it, and you can also copy the chat, and that way you will see the questions, the answers, and the links that we put in the chat. If you do use the Q&A, it just gets answered and then disappears, so other people can't see it. So this morning we will be covering how to preserve food with low sugar and low salt with Hal Meng from the Center of Food Preservation Arts. And we have two audiences this morning. We have our typical city, county residents that follow our webinars. And then we also have several City of Tacoma employees who are getting wellness credits for viewing this webinar. So welcome to city employees. And I will put in the chat the link for you to follow to get the smart sheet, and make sure you get that filed so that you get credit for this. And we want to get this over in your noon hour, so I'm not going to delay it too long. If people have come in late, hopefully they can see something in the chat and check with me, and we'll fill them in. So let me introduce Hal, and then Hal can tell you a little bit about himself and the Center for Food Preservation Arts, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. This is the first time I've done a middle of the day seminar with the EnviroHouse. So I appreciate you taking time out from possibly your lunch hour. Hopefully there'll be some opportunity to answer questions you might have, putting them in the chat, and also take a few minutes at the end. I'm anticipating that probably my presentation will be about 45 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for some good questions and maybe some discussion of upcoming presentations we have.
So Hal, let me interrupt just a second. I did
Absolutely.
not mention in the chat, if you use that, please look at where it says at the bottom, where it says to, and click the drop-down menu and put to everyone rather than just to Hal and myself. And that way other people can see your questions and see the answers. Thank you.
So as already stated, I'm Hal Meng, M-E-N-G is the last name, and I'm the executive director of the Center for Food Preservation Arts, and also the main instructor for it. And the Center for Food Preservation Arts is what technically is called a collaborative. We don't have a specific building, but we work with different organizations like Trinity Lutheran Church in Parkland, also working with a couple of other sites where we use their commercial kitchens to present classes on canning and food preservation of all kinds, including dehydrating and freezing. And then we have a couple of programs working with and for the community. Preserving for the Hungry is a program where we take surplus fruits and convert them into jams and applesauce under Department of Agriculture guidelines so that they can be given out through food banks and pantries. And then we also do something we call guerrilla canning, where we get possibly surplused, but also pretty fresh fruits from gleaning programs and from markets. And a lot of those we prepare and freeze for later use in the Preserving for the Hungry program. So originally I started getting certified as a food preservation specialist through Seattle TILF, which is now Seattle TILF Alliance. And that was in 2013. I started doing some teaching. 2015, we formed the Center for Food Preservation Arts, which you can see in the ring there around our logo. We believe in access, education, supporting community, and then also being involved in community. So our general byline or motto would be growing together through the community of food. Whoops, that direction. So in this workshop, I want to be covering that salt and sugar are not required for food safety in most of the preservation recipes. Where they are needed for safety, they're essential, and we'll point that out. There are techniques for reducing or replacing sugar and salt while you can maintain a good and safe product. And always, this is not medical advice or scientific debate. All of the recipes, all the information are based on approved sources, which are ones that we'll talk in more detail about, but things like the National Center for Home Food Preservation, extension services out of universities, FDA standards, and Department of Agriculture. This always amazes me. And when I made this slide, it's 2 or 3 years old. And the amount of sugar and corn syrup that people in America on the average ingest in a year may or may not have gone up. I'm going to have to see if there's a lot more recent figures on that. But it's just, to me, amazing because a lot of it is combined into all the commercial products. And a lot of that started because sugar does have a role in food preservation, but we've just become addicted to it so that they can put a great deal of it into things that really don't need it. Because as a culture, we've tended to lose our taste and appreciation for things that are a little on the tart side or have a little bit of contrast. And so we can start to look at that and really read the ingredients on things and start pushing that amount down. We also have too much salt. I personally have a little bit of diabetes type 2, and I also have high blood pressure. So I've become very aware of trying to monitor these things. And the one that is really also sneaky, almost beyond the sneakiness of the way they work sugar in, is how there's so much salt. The average American should only be getting about 2,300 milligrams of salt a day, but we get well over 1,000 more than what we need. And this is just an average. So a lot of people have as much as maybe 4,000 milligrams of salt that they ingest a day, especially if they add it to their food automatically without even tasting it. So obviously, I mentioned a couple of the reasons why we should reduce salt and sugar. And basically, a lot of it is health reasons. I'm in the average, about 25% of Americans have type 2 diabetes, and 29%, in fact, I heard a more recent figure that it's actually higher. It might be as high as 32% have high blood pressure. And also, we just get used to having too much salt and sugar, and we can hardly taste some of the natural flavor of the foods. And so it's good to make some changes, to shake things up a little bit, to try different things and experience different flavors. But sugar, and a lot of it started for a couple of reasons in cultures. Back quite a while ago, sugar was essential in preserving, and we'll go into more detail about that. But also on the whole, the taste of sweeteners, whether it was sugar eventually or honey was something that was hard to get. And so it became a status symbol. And so things that were sweet were valued more. And folks and cultures, especially in European cultures, started to lose the appreciation for tastes other than sweetness, because all their food, when they were acquiring status, had that sweetener in it. But in preserving food, sugar naturally helps to preserve a fruit's color, flavor, and texture. That's why when you freeze fruit, especially when our grandparents froze fruit, they would sprinkle sugar over it or put it in some kind of a syrup that had a high sugar content of one type of sugar or another, because that would help to preserve those, the trinity of color, flavor, and texture. We'll get into a little bit more about pectins and how they work, but the majority of regular pectin requires sugar to be able to set things up, but there are alternatives to that. And then sometimes, like when you're preserving a pickle and you need to use a very strong acidic base, in other words, a lot of vinegar in it, you need to offset a little bit of that sourness. And so that's why you see, especially in things like relishes and chutneys and things, a lot of sugar being used. And then this is one of my favorite because I became aware of it with Chinese food, and I'm talking about American Chinese food. In order to cater to our tastes, American Chinese food, as a rule, almost all the dishes have a lot of sugar in them because it made it more attractive to the standard American clientele. So I've always referred to that as the watching out for the crouching tiger, hidden carbs aspect of it. And there are many different kinds of sugar, but they all basically do about the same thing. In other words, the body uses them to create energy by converting them around, but also starches get converted as well as sugars get converted into energy. Starches pass through conversion into glucose, which if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, you become aware of what floats in your bloodstream, your blood glucose level. Fructose is that's almost always naturally found in fruits and vegetables. It will do the same thing as any other sugar and can be turned into fat, but it also can be very challenging to our insulin production. And one of the things that folks think is if the sugar comes from fruit, then it probably is perfectly safe and you can eat a lot of it. That's not completely true. It will still function like just regular sucrose or dextrose, the last two that are listed here. Sucrose is basically what we look at as table sugar, coming from cane or sugar beets, and it breaks down into fructose or glucose, depending. And then dextrose is identical to glucose, but it's made from corn. Then we get back to the natural sweeteners, where yes, they are healthier. Things like honey and agave, molasses, and others, to a certain extent, are healthier, but they often taste sweeter than granulated sugar because of the concentration. So actually, I was shocked when I started to be diagnosed for being pre-diabetic of the fact that I thought that because I used honey in my coffee instead of sugar, it was fine. But the sugar content in the honey is actually much more concentrated. And so it gives it a very high glycemic index. And as I keep coming back to, can be very problematic for diabetics or anyone who's trying to lose weight or just eat a healthier diet. So unfortunately, you can't just use honey and feel that you've done everything you need to do. There are other chemicals out there that serve a fairly similar function, and those are called the sugar alcohols. Now, they're chemically similar to regular sugars, but they're different enough that they're not absorbed well and contain fewer calories. So they have less effect on the blood glucose level. Some of the most popular ones, the ones that are natural that we see around and used a lot, is xylitol. And xylitol has the additional benefit of helping when you drink it in beverages to help prevent dental decay. So that's why you find it in gloves. You find it in different drinks and in gums. But all of these can have other side effects, like especially affecting digestion. At first, getting used to it, you may experience some digestive issues substituting that. And then there are some other substitute sweeteners that are naturally occurring also. There's stevia, which comes from the stevia plant. It's non-caloric and it's non-nutritive. In other words, you can replace sugar on a 1-to-1 ratio with it. Now, it will work for everything except it won't accept anything in fermentation. So you can't make bread with it, you can't make wine with it. And an interesting point, some of us are born with a slightly different configuration of taste buds. And I'm one of those lucky people that has two of the differences. And the first is that the stevia will always give a metallic aftertaste to me. And then the other one, just FYI, is things like cilantro, which a lot of people just love to eat even raw. To me, it tastes like soap. And that's because we are so fortunate we have a few different taste buds than other people. Just like some people have more receptors, so they're far more sensitive to spicy and hot foods and have to avoid them. And then there is another naturally occurring sweetener, inulin, which is made from Jerusalem artichokes, if you're familiar with those. Sometimes they're called sunchokes. They're easy to grow if you're a gardener, but they also can be like weeds, and they are definitely perennials. They'll keep coming back and they'll spread like crazy. But if you allow them to grow, they come up, they're often called sunchokes, because they will put a very tall stalk with a beautiful flower on top. You can also find it in bananas and himica and yacon and some of the other tubers that come from the Andes and other parts of South and Central America. It's often used as a fiber source, which helps reduce the impact of sugars. The more fiber you have, the longer it takes in the food, the longer it takes to digest. And so the lower the glycemic index will appear, but it can often cause gas in some people. So especially if you get it concentrated like in Jerusalem artichokes, you want to start out easily, just trying a few at a time, and not like planting a whole 10 by 10 plant of it and figure that you're going to live off of those solely. It might not agree with you. And then there are artificial ones. I tend to stay away from those because they have even more side effects, especially things like aspartame. But they're out there, they're available, they're mixed into different blends. Some of them are also mixed with more natural ones like xylitol. You want to throw in anything at this point, Jonathan?
Go ahead and finish the last one on that, and then yes, I do, please.
Okay, well, that's pretty much all I have to say about that slide.
Okay, I just wanted to mention I had a comment in the Q&A that viewers are not able to use the chat. And I went into the Zoom settings and it's all set so that you should be able to use it. So I don't know why that isn't happening. I did send a note saying if you do see it, to please let me know, and I didn't hear from anyone. So if that is still not accessible to you, when we finish, I will email we have a one-page list of resources and contact information and so on. I will email that to each of you, either separately or blind copied as a group, but I will get that all out to you. And if you have specific questions, then try the Q&A and see if we can make it work that way. So very sorry that that's happening, but I'll have to call Zoom.
So are people, I wasn't completely following that. Were people able to post questions? I mean, is that how you found out?
No, well, I got a Q&A comment from one of our viewers that the chat is disabled. And on my end, it's all set okay. So I don't know why that's happening, but I will check I'll have to call Zoom to find out.
So would an alternative, if I love to have a lot of questions.
They can use the Q&A. It just won't be visible to everybody.
No, but we'll read it back to folks for sure. All right, well, let's continue on. If we don't have a lot of questions, we may get through this even faster.
Well, and the other thing, Hal, if we finish a little bit early, we can let people raise their hands and ask questions verbally too.
Oh, okay, if that works, definitely. All right, so now we're getting to my favorite part, how we can use natural things to replace both sweeteners, a lot of, well, processed sugars especially, and concentrated sweeteners like honey. And I'd love to start off with fruit juices. And there are some marvelous ways to make your own juice. And it struck me after I put this all together and we were just getting ready to start, that after all the times I presented this, I suddenly realized that I should put a picture in here of one of my favorite tools, which is a steam juice extractor. It kind of looks like a small individual still. But what it does is it takes steam and you can just put it on your stovetop and the steam breaks up a fruit and you collect the juice from it. So it's natural, it's pretty clear. You don't have to filter out any of the pulp, which you get with juicers. And that's a whole different thing if you want a juice to already been boiling. So if you either freeze it or water bath can it right away, it's completely sterile. But anyway, long story short, that's one way to get juices to replace part or all of the, all of the sweetener and water content. You can use it to can or freeze juices and freeze fruit in juice, or in rare cases, you can concentrate the juice by boiling it down into a syrup. But you want to be careful with that if you're trying to reduce sugar, because of course, that's concentrating down the sugars. You can also make fruit purees. And one of the things I love to do with that, yeah, I grow figs, I have some strawberries, I of course buy bananas on sale, and I make my own applesauce. But you can puree those down. Whoa, why did it do that? You can puree those down and use them at any time, especially by freezing them individually in ice cube trays, and then pop them into a Ziploc baggie, or if you have like a food saver, vacuum pack. And then I have a dehydrator, and I love to dehydrate fruits and use them as sweeteners. And the process in that is to turn the fruit into a leather, which you can eat, but also be careful because that's a concentrated sugar source, just like dehydrated fruit is. But then if you have it very well dehydrated, you can run it through a blender or a herb pureer, and you can make a powder that you can add both for flavor and for sweetness and use that to in the place of sugars. So you're going to be picking up fiber that way also, which is going to help reduce the glycemic index some. But like I said, it's also got some concentrated sugars to it. Then we get into jams and jellies and talking about how those work. We talked a little bit about how sugar helps to preserve flavor, texture, and color, but also what makes a jam or jelly is pectin. And what it does is pectin acts like in a little bit like cornstarch. If you've ever worked with cornstarch, you know it thickens up anything with liquid in it, like water. And the way it does it is a similar way to the way pectin works, is that it creates a network of fibers that wrap around the water molecules and bind them. And that's part of the way that it helps preserve the food, because all bacteria need available water, available H2O molecules to be able to grow and reproduce. And if they're bound up, then they are less available to the bacteria, which is why if you open a bottle of jam and it picks up some like mold spores from the air, you're going to see mold growing on the top of it, but you're not going to see anything that's happening underneath, because the surface of it being exposed to air again after it was canned has picked up some available water. And just a little side note here, I'm sure all of us at one point or another have seen some mold or mildew growing on top of the jam. And we figure, well, I'll just scrape it off. But that isn't really a good advice, especially now that people in the general population are becoming more sensitive to molds and mildews, because the mold works a lot in a similar way to the fibers that come off of mushrooms and fungus, is that it grows down all the way through the product. So by time you see the mold on top, it's sent its mycelium roots all the way down. And if you're very allergic to that, that's going to affect your health and your digestion. So unfortunately, by the time you see it on the top, it's probably all bad again. But all plants contain some kind of pectin, because that's what helps them to build their cell walls. And there's all different kinds of pectin. Some of them require a lot of sugar to work. Like the regular natural pectins may take almost the same weight of sugar as you have of fruit for it to be able to set up. Others, like the pomona pectin, which we'll talk about, are a low sugar type, in that it doesn't require sugar, because all pectins need three things to set up: the pectin itself, a catalyst to help build the framework, which in the case of Pomona's pectin is a calcium salt. In natural pectin, it's sugar, and then it needs a acid environment. And most fruit has acid, but sometimes you have to add some. So this I found, the next one is a really useful chart, in that you can look and break fruits down into three main groups. The first one has enough pectin and acid to gel with only the addition of sugar. But as I mentioned, it might require a lot of sugar. These are the kind of jams that if you had a grandmother or someone in the family that made totally natural gel without added pectin, that's what they do. They take something like blackberries, grapes, some grape juice, and they would boil it a lot so it would concentrate, adding into it enough sugar to provide that framework for the pectin to work on. The second type needs the addition of either acid or pectin, and it depends on what kind of fruit it is and what's going on in there. But that's why it's always important to use a good recipe if you're going to experiment with not using pectins. And the third group will always need the addition of an acid and a pectin, or both in every case. And then we'll get into salt. Now, this is usually the place that I would take a pause and ask people if they had any questions. So, Jonda, do we want to give some space for that, or?
We can see if folks do have questions, if they want to put it in the Q&A, and then raise hands at the end. I am not seeing any so far.
Okay. Well, I just like to give a little opportunity here since some people might be on their lunch hours. So, yeah. So now let's move into salt. Basically, all culinary salt is sodium chloride. There are other kinds of salts that are used sometimes in cooking and especially in food preservation, which are based more on potassium and things like that. But all salts, even sea salt and novelty salts like pink salt, rock salts, they are just sodium chloride, but with the addition of minerals. And there's a lot of debate. That's why I don't want to get into talking about whether like a sea salt is better than just a mine salt, because it just depends on so many factors, and don't want to get into a scientific debate on that. But there's nothing wrong with using some of these sea salts, novelty salts, colored salts, but they're not going to be any healthier in terms of reducing your sodium than those would be. Just in general, a lot of salt, especially table salt, like Morton's table salt, things like that, have iodine added, because iodine was missing from our diets, especially if you live far from the ocean. And so they started introducing that as just standard practice in a lot of table salts. Problem with that is if you want to use them in canning, they will cause things like, say you're making pickles. They'll make your pickles softer. It'd be harder to get a good crisp pickle. And also it may cause a little bit of clouding. But then a lot of salts also have an anti-caking agent in it, which does nothing for our body's health. And so salts that have that added, you probably want to avoid them all the time. But the caking agent will add cloudiness into your pickles for sure. And here just below are some examples of how different kinds of salt with different mineral contents. One of my favorites to use rarely in our kind of cooking is a salt that comes from India, which is a black salt, which actually has a slight sulfur overtone to it. And that sounds terrible, but you got to remember you're using just a little bit of it. So it's worth seeking that out and trying just a little of it. So why do we use it at all? Well, the main function, except in a couple of cases, is for the taste. Salt is something our seeking that out is built into us because it helps us to keep from dehydrating when it's in the proper amount. But once again, our ability to taste and discern that has been dulled by it being in everything so much. It's also one of those interesting things that technically is called a flavor enhancer, because it creates on the tongue and the taste buds a contrast. And so it will amplify the taste. For example, like caramels with sea salt, it will tend to amplify the sweetness and the caramely kind of taste. So unfortunately, those are the two things we're trying to reduce, are the sugar and the salt. but there's nothing wrong with a little bit of caramel sea salt. The one place that salt is definitely required, and I should add a couple others, but one place is for safe fermentation of vegetables and fruits, like when we're making sauerkraut or kimchi, because it kills the bad bacteria and allows the good to grow. And so if you're trying to do a ferment, you're going to use a lot of salt, if it's a lactose ferment, as opposed to like making wine or beer or bread. Salt is not required for preservation itself in pickles if you're using a 5% vinegar in an amount that's equal to or greater than the water in a recipe. And this is a good point to emphasize that when you're making anything that's going to be shelf stable, especially, you should be using a recipe from a certified source, like one of those that we'll give in the list at the end, because those recipes have been tested over and over again, and it will tell the right percentage of salt and various things you need for safety. Salt also draws the water out of food through osmosis. So in some pickles and marinades, you put it in a brine, which is referred to as a short brine as opposed to long brine, which is long brine is when you're making something like a sauerkraut or something. And somehow the automatic fade is set on some of these slides. So I may keep bouncing back and forth. Sorry about that. So it's essential then for some of the pickles and marinades where you soak them before, and it creates space in the cells. And that allows the flavoring to be sucked into it. That's getting irritating. But it's essential in dehydrating meats and fish. And in making smoked foods, the brining extracts the moisture and allows the smoke to penetrate, just like it would a vinegar solution or a marinade. But other alternatives to salt to accent flavor are things like lemon and lime juice and herbal preparations. I spent quite a bit of time down in Guadalajara, that part of Mexico, where they use lemon and lime juices a lot for additional flavorings. And I just found that and the way they use herbs down there to be great, because a lot of the recipes in the home cooking have very little salt in them. And a variety of herbs can be mixed into different blends that allow you to match flavors and emphasize the flavor of the food you're trying to bring to light. Like savory and sweet blends. Some herbs are called savory, like for example, peppers are definitely savory. Others have a slightly natural sweet taste, like thyme or marjoram or sweet savory, things like that. And so here, now we're getting into some of the resources that are good to use. So these are all what are called the certified resources, ones that have done a lot, have done a whole lot, like the National Center for Home Food Preservation, University of Georgia, Extension Service, and then of course the Blue Book and other books from Ball are just an amazing resource. And then here are some specific online resources for things like canning fruit, the Pomona pectin, which is wonderful. They have lots of recipes, and they answer questions through their chat a lot. This has just like gone insane on me. Sorry about that. things on using fruits as a substitute, herbal substitutes for salts, and then ways of contacting us. Do you have something you want to throw in?
Hal, yeah, can you maybe back that up to the first page on the resources and leave it up for a second and then go through those, just show them again. And folks that, since they can't get it in the chat and they're going to have to wait probably a few days, I'll email it, but since they have to wait a few days to get this online, go to the resources and maybe people can take pictures of it with their phone.
They're going to have to be quick because something has gone south on this and it's advancing on its own. But so this one is up and you have about 8 seconds before it changes. Yeah, my apologies. I have no idea what went south on that. But
that's probably in the PowerPoint setting.
Well, I thought I'd cleaned that out, but obviously I was wrong.
Okay.
So these are all readily accessible ones, and they're all certified sources. And then these are a lot of online ones. Talk about some of them from the extension services. There are some like the, some of them are basically cooking ones, which are a little less concerned about whether there's Department of Agriculture certified, because most of these recipes will not be fruit state or self-stable. Like, for example, using fruit as a substitute, that's just in your general cooking. Come back to that, give people an opportunity to try and pop a look at that. Taste of Home and the spruce.com are both amazing resources for all different kinds of things. And then here's a way for you to look at some of the resources we have. Well, we have a website. Right now it's on a blog page. So we've made it as easy to navigate as possible, but within the next year, we're going to have like a WordPress that'll be a little easier to search on. But it has all kinds of categories. It has a lot of recipes, has a lot of articles. We have a Facebook page where we put a lot of up-to-date information, and we share a lot of information from other respected Facebook pages that have recipes and ideas and things that we have vetted. We have now a total of, if you include videos that we have made with our partners, and would be like including links to some of the videos that we do with the EnviroHouse. That's on our own YouTube channel. And then we have a direct email. Now, our Preserving for the Hungry program, we're always looking for supplies and volunteers to come in and help us make jams, jellies, and applesauce for food banks. And we also then, of course, have classes that we teach, sometimes at the same facility that we do the canning for the Hungry program. And all that information, that's always on our Facebook page as well. And then here's all the contact information for the EnviroHouse and all the wonderful programs they do there. So I turn it back to you if you want to say some things about that.
Thank you. And I would like to add that we are now open to the public for Thursday through Sunday for walk-in visitors from 11 to 5. I'm there a little longer than that, but that gives me time to get, email and all those other things done. I'm working from home on Wednesdays, and I'm periodically working on Tuesdays when I'm going in for tours or webinars. So come by and see us. The easiest way to reach me, if you didn't get that off the screen, is ehouse@cityoftacoma.org. City folks can find me in the directory at J. Volkmer. And You can register for EnviroHouse workshops and webinars at cityoftacoma.org/workshops. Coming up August 2nd, we have Preserving Fresh Food by Dehydrating with Hal. And again, on Saturday, August 13th at 10 a.m., we have Pickling Cucumbers and Vegetables with Hal. I also wanted to mention that the Grit City Tree Program for Tacoma residents is open. That will be closing the end of August, and that's where you can register to get free trees for your parking strip, singular for your house, or you can get them for your neighborhood with a group of people. And you can find that at cityoftacoma.org/urban forestry. And those are all in the handout that I will send to everybody. The webinar is being recorded, and as soon as our city media people have time to get it loaded, uploaded on the city channel, the website that's showing on the screen, you can see those at youtube.com/cityoftacoma. Look for the playlists and see webinars or workshops and how-to videos. For those of you who are city employees, you can, I'll have this link in what I send out to you, but you can, I think, go to the hub and get the wellness program, get the SMART form that you can fill out to get credit for this. And I think there's information in the handout that I'll send you on the countywide gleaning project. If you happen to have fruit trees or excess fruit or vegetables in your yard that you want the gleaners to collect and use, I'll send that. And I think that covers most of it. So I'm terribly sorry that the chat isn't working, and I will call Zoom as soon as we get off here. So thank you all for attending, and I don't see any hands up or any Q&A. So with that, unless somebody has, well, there's one Q&A. Okay, that's from Shannon saying thank you. So it is working on that end. So, okay, thank you, everybody. And I will email this out to those of you who have attended, and we'll see Hal in another week or so.
And when you close this off for the public, can we talk for just a minute?
I will close it off, and then we can Teams or something, because it'll keep recording if I close it off and I'll lose you. So I'll just get back to you, okay?
All righty.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.